have probably heard this at funerals, right, or read it on countless sympathy cards. It's recited by millions of people all over the world. But what if I told you we've kind of misunderstood the whole vibe? Because when you look at the actual historical context of these words, the tone shifts dramatically away from that quiet, sleepy lullaby we usually assume it is.
And here is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Just one single Hebrew battle word completely rewrites the entire narrative. In English, we read that goodness and mercy will follow me. It sounds nice, right? Like a polite little puppy just taking a gentle stroll behind you. But the original Hebrew word there is radaf. And radaf literally means to chase down and hunt. Think about that. That one tiny linguistic detail completely flips the script from a passive comfort card to a really gritty survival song. Now, to really wrap our heads around this intensity, we have to look at the author, David. He chose the image of a shepherd, which honestly is a massive historical paradox. On the one hand, shepherds were completely despised in ancient Egyptian culture. They were considered ceremonially unclean, doing the dirty, bottom-tier peasant work. But at the exact same time across the ancient Near East, kings and pharaohs were proudly claiming shepherd as this supreme royal title. It's wild to think that David was a guy who had actually lived both of those realities. He knew both of these vastly different worlds from the inside out.
And that brings us to David's actual reality when writing this. We all deal with modern stress, work deadlines, anxiety, an inbox that just won't quit. But David's reality takes the concept of pressure to a completely different stratosphere. He wasn't just sitting out in some peaceful, breezy meadow with a harp when these thoughts hit him. He wrote this as a hunted fugitive. He was literally hiding out in the harsh, unforgiving Judean wilderness, actively being chased down by King Saul's entire army. When you realize the author is a guy with a giant target on his back, hiding in caves, well, the words stop being just a pretty poem, and they become this raw, desperate testament of survival.
So, mapping the English words against David's original language is incredibly revealing. We just talked about radaf, meaning to hunt, but take a look at the word soul. The Hebrew word there is nephesh, and it's not just some floaty, invisible ghost. Or what about shadow? The actual word is salmaveth, which means a valley of deep, pitch-black darkness or death. Every single line of this text carries so much more weight and edge than the English translation lets on.
Okay, keeping that heavy, hunted context in mind, let's look at the famous opening declaration, I shall not want. A lot of times today, we think of this as just, trying not to desire the newest smartphone or a bigger house. But the irony here is absolutely stunning. David is declaring total, absolute provision, while he is literally hiding in a barren wasteland. He uses the imagery of still waters to show exactly how perfectly a shepherd meets every single need, even when the environment around them offers absolutely nothing but dirt and rocks.
This gets even more fascinating when you understand the psychology of the flock itself. Sheep are the ultimate prey animals. They have zero natural defenses, and they are terrified of pretty much everything. Because of this, a sheep will not physically lie down. If it's hungry, if it's thirsty, if there's tension among the other sheep, or if it senses a predator anywhere nearby. So, when the text says the shepherd makes them lie down in green pastures, we aren't just talking about a sheep feeling a little sleepy. It represents this profound psychological state where absolutely every single fear and need has been answered by the shepherd's protective presence.
And that actually brings us right back to that word nephesh. When the English text says he restores my soul, our modern minds automatically jump to a detached, ethereal spirit. But to a Hebrew speaker like David, nephesh means your throat, your breath, your stomach, your whole living, breathing, and completely exhausted being. The shepherd isn't just giving out a little spiritual pick-me-up, he is literally rescuing and piecing back together the entire physical and mental being of a hunted, drained man.
Now, I want you to notice what happens to the language right in the middle of the text. It's brilliant. As David enters that Salmaveth, that valley of deep darkness, the grammar shifts dramatically. Back in the green pastures, David was talking about the shepherd. He makes me lie down, he leads me. But the exact second it gets dark, the pronouns change. It immediately becomes, for you are with me. The whole thing pivots from a poem about the shepherd into an intimate, urgent conversation with him, right exactly when the danger is at its absolute highest.
And while he's in that dark valley, David points out two very different tools in the shepherd's hands, the rod and the staff. This makes perfect sense when you realize they have entirely different jobs. The staff is that gentle tool with a crook on the end, and it's used for guiding the flock, or, gently pulling wayward sheep out of bushes. But the rod? The rod is literally a heavy, club-like weapon used strictly to beat back predators. David is showing us that true comfort requires both. You absolutely need the gentle guidance, for sure, but you also desperately need fierce, weaponized protection.
From there, the imagery just keeps getting bolder. David talks about a table being prepared before him in the presence of my enemies. Now remember, David is currently being hunted by an actual army. So imagine the ultimate flex here. You're just casually sitting down to a peaceful, lavish, totally unhurrying meal while a hostile army is forced to just stand at the perimeter and watch. They are completely unable to touch you simply because of who is hosting the dinner. I mean, it's almost absurd when you really picture it.
And this perfectly sets up the climax of the text, bringing us right back to that incredible word of radif. David knows exactly what it feels like to have enemies hunting him down, but he ends his song by completely flipping that reality on its head. Goodness and mercy aren't just politely following behind him. No, they are relentless. Goodness and mercy are the ones actively chasing him down, pursuing him, and hunting him every single day of his life.
What's really fascinating is how this whole motif echoes forward historically. Centuries later, Jesus steps onto the scene and claims this exact title, the Good Shepherd. In the context of the source material, this is a massive claim. He's embracing both of those ancient worlds we looked at earlier, the grit and lowly service of the despised peasant worker, right alongside the supreme authority and power of the royal king.
Because you see, in the ancient world, a shepherd would literally sleep across the opening of the sheepfold at night. They physically became the door. Nothing could get to the sheep without going through the shepherd first. So when you put it all together, this text is ultimately not a soft comfort card. It's the bold declaration of a king with a weapon, lying in the gap as the door to fiercely protect his flock.
Once you see the real history, the physical danger, and the actual Hebrew weight behind these words, the whole thing transforms from a gentle lullaby into a powerful survival anthem. So I'd love to know what your biggest takeaway from this explainer is. Honestly, which line of Psalm 23 hit you totally differently today? Drop your thoughts, and let's keep uncovering the incredible depths of these texts together.
This opening line, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Now, what's really interesting about this is the powerful, striking simplicity of that statement. In just 10 words, the entire premise of the text is established. It immediately sets up this core relationship between a caretaker, the shepherd, and a dependent. And because that shepherd is present, the ultimate conclusion is total fulfillment. I shall not want. Literally, there is no lack. Right? So it's important to understand where these words are actually coming from. This text is traditionally attributed to David, and understanding that attribution helps us frame this, not just as some nice, uplifting poem, but as a profound survival and comfort guide. It's a text written from the perspective of someone who fundamentally understood what it meant to need literal and metaphorical care, relying entirely on a higher power just to survive. And out of that intense need for survival and comfort, 4 distinct themes emerge: guidance, protection, provision, and everlasting care. Keep these 4 pillars in the back of your mind, because every single verse we look at next maps directly back to one of these foundational concepts. Basically map out the journey the poem describes early on. Just take a moment to absorb the progression here. Step 1, green pastures. Step 2, still waters. Step 3, paths of righteousness. The scenery being painted here is remarkably peaceful, isn't it? There is no rush, no chaos. It's a slow, deliberate guidance into environments that are designed specifically to provide rest and nourishment for the traveler. Let's read the exact text that corresponds to this peaceful guidance. Verse 2 and the beginning of verse 3 read, "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." Notice the active role of the shepherd here. The shepherd maketh and leadeth. The result of this gentle guidance to the pastures and waters isn't just physical rest. It achieves something much deeper. It actively restores the very soul of the narrator. But why is this guidance happening in the first place? Well, the text explicitly tells us the narrator is led in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. The guidance isn't random. It has a specific righteous direction, and it serves to reflect the character and the name of the one doing the leading. Look at the stark contrast we have here. We are moving from the still waters and green pastures of verse 2 directly into a perilous journey in verse 4, the valley of the shadow of death. And this brilliantly illustrates the reality of the human experience that the text captures. I mean, the journey isn't just about resting in green fields all day. It inevitably involves passing through deep, dark, and terrifying terrain. The tension in the narrative builds dramatically right here. So, here is that famous turning point in the text. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Notice the shift. We go from talking about the shepherd to talking directly to the shepherd with the word thou. In the darkest possible environment, literally the shadow of death, the narrator declares an absolute lack of fear. Why? Simply because of the companion's presence. For thou art with me. But, it's not just a passive presence. The text explicitly names the tools of this protection. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. These are the literal implements a shepherd would use in the real world to fend off predators and guide the sheep. In the context of this perilous valley, these tools become the ultimate symbols of active, tangible comfort and defense against whatever evils are hidden in the shadows. The triumphant, elevated tone of verse 5. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. This is no longer just about barely surviving in a valley. This is about being actively honored and provided for, even when threats are literally watching you. We see an incredible juxtaposition here. On one side, you have intense vulnerability. The narrator is literally surrounded in the presence of mine enemies. But on the other side, in that exact same moment, there is unbelievable abundance. A table has been formally prepared, and the narrator's head is anointed with oil, which historically is a massive symbol of honor, luxury, and favor. The threat of the enemies is entirely neutralized by the sheer abundance of the host's provision. And then the verse caps off this imagery with a phrase that is echoed through history: my cup runneth over. The provision isn't just adequate. It doesn't just meet the bare minimum requirements to get by. It is an overflowing, boundless supply of care that simply cannot even be contained by the cup holding it. The concluding verse of the poem brings our journey to its permanent destination. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The confidence here is absolute. There is zero hesitation. Surely it will happen. Let's move to the macro view and see how this builds. We started in step 1, the pasture, which was a place of temporary rest and restoration. Then we moved to step 2, the valley, which was a dark but ultimately transitional journey. And finally, we arrive at step 3, the house of the Lord. This isn't temporary. It is a permanent dwelling place forever. The journey of the poem literally takes us from the open fields into the permanent, secure house of the caretaker. And while dwelling in that house, what's happening? The text says the narrator is actively followed by goodness and mercy. Back in the valley, enemies might have been lurking in the shadows, but now, the only things pursuing the narrator are goodness and mercy. And this is an explicit promise for all the days of my life. So, the crucial point is this. When we look at the entire structure of this ancient text, it perfectly executes its 4 core themes. The narrator is 1. Perfectly guided by a shepherd to still waters. 2. Fiercely protected by a rod and staff in the darkest valley. 3. Abundantly provided for with a prepared table and an overflowing cup right amidst enemies. And 4. Cared for forever, dwelling permanently in the house of the Lord. We've seen exactly what the text says and the powerful journey it outlines across these 6 verses. But I want to leave you with a thought as we wrap up this explainer. Look back at the imagery we've uncovered, from green pastures to dark valleys to overflowing cups. Why does this specific ancient promise of care still resonate so deeply with us today? Think about where you might be on that map right now. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible text with me. And hey, keep seeking out the structure and the stories around you.
Thanks for watching.
Stay blessed and don't forget to share this video with everyone.